Hello, I call this meeting to order at 5:30 exactly. Clerk, if you could read the notice of the hearing.
This is notice of the budget hearing from section 65.90, subsection 4. Notice is hereby given to the qualified electors of the Salem School District that the budget hearing will be held at the Salem School District Middle School Gymnasium on the 26th day of October 2021 at 5:30 p.m. The summary of the budget is printed below. Detailed copies of the budget was available for inspection in the district's office at 8828 Antioch Road, Salem, Wisconsin 53168, dated this 28th day of September 2021. Actually, it should be the 26th of September. I'm sorry, that's from last September. Signed, Steve Brown, District Clerk. Sorry.
Great. Connie Marquez.
All right. Glad to be here tonight. Connie said I have 30 minutes and I can't go a minute over, so I'll do my best to stay under that time limit. Before going over the proposed budget for this 21-22 school year, I wanted to take the opportunity to go over some of the terminology and school finance calculations that you will be hearing about tonight. Sometimes when I talk about budgets and school finance with my wife at home, she says it sounds like I'm speaking another language, so I want to prevent that tonight. School finance in the state of Wisconsin follows the Wisconsin Uniform Financial Accounting Requirements, also known as WUFR, and that is established by the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. And at the foundation of WUFR is the concept of fund accounting. So we like to make the joke that DPI knows how to put the fun in fund accounting.
Sorry.
The idea of fund accounting is that independent accounting entities are established with a specific purpose. And so DPI has actually 23 different funds that accounting transactions can go into. Luckily, Salem only uses 6 of the 23, which keeps things a little simpler, but some districts use almost all of the funds available. I'm not going to go too much into detail into all the funds, but I did want to highlight the 6 that we do use and call out a few points. The most common fund that you'll hear tonight is Fund 10, or the general fund. We use those terms interchangeably, and it is used to account for all financial transactions relating to the school district's current operations, except for those that are required to be in other funds. So it's pretty much everything unless it needs to be in a different fund. And so the other funds that we have are Fund 21, Special Projects Fund, and that is most of our school, what we call school activity accounts. So anytime that a school group does a fundraising or we receive a gift or donation, that's when we use the Fund 21. And over the years, DPI has kind of pulled back on what can be in Fund 21, and previously was Fund 60, which we've closed out now. We don't have too much activity in Fund 21 at the moment, but anytime we receive a gift, donation, or there's some sort of fundraising that might carry over multiple years, it goes in there. Fund 27 is another major fund, and this is used to account for the excess cost of special education and related services. No fund balance can be kept in this fund, so at the end of the year, actually, we do a transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27 to make up the difference or the shortfall with state aid that we get in Fund 27. Fund 38 is non-referendum debt, and this is used to account for transactions for the repayment of debt that was incurred without a referendum. And so for us, we have some energy exemptions, some energy exemption debt from back in 2015 that is in that fund, and we actually refinance that. I'll talk about that in a little bit later. And then the last 2 funds are Fund 46, the Long-Term Capital Improvement Fund. And so with that, the board established a long-term capital improvement plan several years ago. The rule is that any money transferred into that fund had to sit there for at least 5 years. We've passed that 5-year mark, so now we can begin to tick off things in our long-term capital improvement plan, and that's where transactions are accounted for in that fund. And the last fund is Fund 50, our food service fund. So any revenues or expenditures related to providing food service for our students is recorded in that fund. So it's a quick overview of the funds. So one of the questions I get all the time from people in the public, teachers, friends, is where does a school district's revenue come from? And we do get revenue from a lot of different sources, but the property tax levy and the general state aid comprise approximately 86% of our Fund 10 or general fund operating revenue in this upcoming budget. These two amounts are determined by the revenue limit, which I will talk about in a second. But as you can see on the slide, the table shows kind of a breakdown of percentage of where our Fund 10 revenue comes from, with property tax being about 43.4% and general state aid coming in at 42.2%. So that leaves about 14% left for other things, and per pupil categorical aid, which is another state aid outside of the revenue limit, accounts for 4.7% or $790,000, and the remaining revenue, it accounts for about 10% of our revenue, and that includes federal revenue, student fees, open enrollment payments from other districts, and so that is that remaining 10% of the revenue. And then there's also a graph there that just kind of breaks it up into colors, and as you can see, those property tax levy, which is the gray one, and the general state aid, the teal one, account for the vast majority of our revenue. And so I mentioned the revenue limit. So the other thing I get asked all the time is, what is the revenue limit and how is it calculated? And so I apologize if all of you know this in and out, but I just wanted to review this for people in the audience. And I think it's a helpful reminder every once in a while to go over it. But in 1993, the Wisconsin legislature instituted a limit on the revenue a school district is entitled to receive each year. The district's revenue limit is the maximum revenue that a district can raise through state general aid and property tax for funds 10, 38, and 41. We don't have Fund 41 here, so it really is just Fund 10 and 38 that fall into that revenue limit. And the calculation for the revenue limit is actually very complex. It's like a giant spreadsheet with probably about 100 different cells and if, and, or statements going in. But I tried to summarize it in the simplest form possible, in that little graphic at the top of this slide here. Essentially, it is driven by the resident membership FTE, or full-time equivalent. And so that is the number of students that you have. And we get funding for students depending on the grade that they're in at slightly different rates. So our 4K students, we get 0.6 of an FTE counted. And then for all other students, we get 1.0 FTE. So even though we normally refer to our student enrollment count by the number of students, that number gets calculated into an FTE number. And then that number is multiplied by the revenue limit per pupil amount, and that varies by district. And then the last thing you do is add any one-time or non-recurring exemptions. And for us, we have a few of those, one of which is our operating referendum is considered a non-recurring exemption. And we also, this year, qualified for the hold harmless and declining enrollment exemptions. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a couple slides from now. But when the revenue limits were instituted back in the 1993-1994 school year, each district's per pupil amount was based on their prior year's revenue per student. In 1993, so that the year before, Salem's per student revenue was below the state average. And so the revenue limit has just kind of kept this going on, and so that has persisted, and we are still considered a low revenue school district, meaning our per pupil amount is actually the lowest it can be. That'll come into play a little bit later. And so I just want to kind of break down all three of those parts that go into that revenue limit calculation. So I mentioned the resident membership FTE. So it's actually a 3-year average of your September FTE and your summer school FTE. So I tried to simplify it by just saying resident membership FTE, but it's actually the 3-year average. So our 21-22 September membership FTE actually was remarkably the same number as the previous year. We did have an increase this year of 4 K students, but as I mentioned, they only get counted as 0.6 in the FTE calculation. And we did see a little bit of a drop in the rest of the grades, K5 through 8th grade, and so that offset each other, and our FTE number was 1,047. However,
I just have one quick question, if
Yes,
I may.
please.
On the FTE for the pre-K, if a student is in full day, is that still 0.6?
Yes, for 4K, yep.
4K.
And that's one of the things that's been talked about at the state level, is trying to get the full funding, but that's not currently how it is at this moment, and likely won't be next year either.
Okay, thank you.
So our 3-year average actually dropped from 1,080 to 1,066. So in that part of the calculation, that resident membership FTE number actually decreased just slightly. The next part of that calculation is that per pupil amount, and our per pupil amount stayed the same. There is no revenue limit per pupil increase for this school year or for next year in the state budgets. So that was normally every year the state provides some sort of increase, which kind of offsets the increase that we have for salary and benefits each year. But with school districts receiving federal funding through the ESSER funds, the state decided that they would not be having a per pupil increase for this year or for next year. So that's a major point as well, which will come into play as we talk about the budget tonight. And then that last piece is adding in the non-recurring exemptions. So the resident membership FTE decreased, the per pupil stayed the same, so that would, so far we're down in revenue. But our non-recurring exemptions actually caused our revenue limit to increase overall. The biggest one is our operating referendum. So this is the 3rd and final year of our operating referendum. And so last year our operating referendum was $3 million. This year it's $3.6 million. So we saw a $600,000 increase from that, which kind of offset that decrease from taking the lower resident membership FTE. And then the other thing is, due to our drop in our 3-year membership average, we received a hold harmless and a declining enrollment exemption. And so the whole purpose of that in the revenue limit formula is to kind of make districts whole when their numbers decrease. They don't want you to have to make a lot of cuts if it's just a 1-year decline, but so we received that exemption, and as long as, if our numbers were to go up next year, our 3-year average were to go up, we would lose that exemption. So we wouldn't necessarily gain as much revenue as you would think with an increase in FTE next year, because you would have to account for losing that declining enrollment exemption and the hold harmless exemption. So I just want to point that out in case next year our FTE number goes up and we're like, yay, more revenue, and it doesn't necessarily mean that, because there's a lot of factors at play. So then the next part is wondering, how does that revenue limit play into the property tax levy calculation and the mill rate calculation? And so I try to keep everything as simple as possible. So that top graphic shows how the revenue limit, equalization aid, and property tax levy are all connected. So you take that revenue limit that is calculated using that equation on the previous slide, and then on October 15th, the state certifies the equalization aid for all the school districts, and there's also a couple smaller aids, the computer aid and personal property aid, and you would take the revenue limit, subtract out those state aids or equalization aids, and then what's left is your property tax levy. So that is how all that is related. And then the other thing, the other term you might hear quite a bit is the mill rate. Everybody's wondering, well, is our mill rate going up? And so that mill rate is actually just taking the school district property tax levy amount, dividing it by the total equalized property value within the school district boundaries. So for us, the school district levy as proposed is $7,435,583. So you take that tax levy amount divided by the equalized property value. So if you took all the property value within our boundaries, that's $1,083,412,432. Then you multiply that times 1,000, and then you get your mill rate, which is expressed in dollars and cents, and that's the amount per $1,000 of property that you have, and that's the tax rate per $1,000 of property that you have. So that's how all those terms, the revenue limit, property tax levy, and mill rate, are all related. Okay? And so with that, I do want to talk about the 21-22 budget. I've thrown around a few of these terms, and some of them weren't finalized. Actually, the final piece of the puzzle wasn't finalized until October 15th, so that's why the budget isn't approved until October. Some people are like, the school year started, how are you functioning? And we have a preliminary budget, a proposed budget, an idea of what things are going to be. We try to estimate over the summer, and my colleagues in all these different school districts are all kind of theorizing what is the aid going to look like, and so the five of the key pieces of the budget calculation are: one, most importantly, is the student membership count, which is done on the third Friday of September, and we have to submit that to DPI in early October. We take the summer school membership as well. So in the summer of 2020, so right after the pandemic had just started, we actually had we ended up not even getting a FTE for summer school that year. So we previously had averaged right around 20 FTE for summer school, and in summer of 2020, that number actually dropped to 0. And so this year, we actually got the number back up, not quite to 20, we were at 15 FTE, but our summer school membership number jumped back up a little bit. Then the hold harmless and declining enrollment exemptions weren't finalized till later in October. Equalized property values come from the Wisconsin Department of Revenue, so I'm waiting on that piece till the fall. And then the last piece of the puzzle was coming from DPI with the state aid certification back a couple weeks ago on October 15th. So we actually published a notice in the paper with the proposed budget, and that was published a couple days before the October 15th certification. So it was like best estimate, and I was within a couple $1,000s of it, but so you might see if you compare what was published in the paper a couple weeks ago to what's being talked about tonight, the numbers have changed slightly, but we're talking less than 0.5% in total budget. So just kind of going over at a high level, I'm going to do the Fund 10 budget summary first, and then we'll go over the rest of the funds for the 21-22 budget. Looking at my clock, I'm at 18 minutes, so gotta speed it up. Fund 10, we talk about beginning fund balance, so that was $2,509,413, and that was up from the previous year's beginning fund balance by about $200,000. We did see our revenue did increase last year, once again to the increase in our operating referendum. So in the 1920 school year, our operating referendum was $1.5 million. Last year it was $3 million, so that was a significant increase in revenue. And we also last year had some decreased costs. Our transportation costs were down a little bit because we had less students in person last year. So we spent a little less on transportation. And in total, we ended up with about a $200,000 addition to our fund balance last year. So our fund balance is higher. Then as we move into revenues, our revenues are up this year. We got the new round of ESSER funds, the federal funds, so that has helped our revenue. Additionally, our open enrollment revenue, so we have students who live in other districts and open enroll here. That number is up, so we have an increase in our open enrollment in revenue. And then additionally, as I mentioned, our referendum went from $3 million last year to $3.6 million, so that's a $600,000 increase. So our total revenues are up a little bit over $1 million compared to last year. For total expenditures, those are up as well. One of the main things that we did or expanded upon this year was our 4K program. We now offer a full day 4K. So we added another section of 4K. Additionally, there's an increase in salary and benefits every year, usually based on CPI for the salary, and then when our health insurance comes in, that's usually going up every year. There are inflationary increases to things such as our utility bills, our transportation costs, any kind of purchase service, or supplies are usually more expensive the following year, so that increased. As I mentioned, we're getting additional ESSER 2 revenue, but with that we're also having additional ESSER 2 expenses. Those two offset each other, but it does cause our overall expenditure amount to increase. And then lastly, we do have some facilities and maintenance projects budgeted for this upcoming, or for this 21-22 school year. And most times, most districts try to budget the revenues and expenditures to the exact same amount. That's pretty typical. You'll notice that our revenues are slightly higher than our budgeted expenditures. And the reason for that is our board policy 6235 basically tells us we need to keep a 15% fund balance. And so if the revenues and expenditures were the exact same, our fund balance would have dropped slightly below that number. So revenues are actually about $28,000 more than the expenditures to keep that fund balance above that 15% mark. So you'll notice that. That is different from last year. I think most years school districts try to keep revenues and expenditures the same, but that's why that number is slightly different. And then kind of going into all the funds, so there, like I mentioned, Fund 10 is the big one. I've kind of highlighted those already. Those expenditures and revenues are up. And then for special projects, which include our Funds 21 and Fund 27, the vast majority of which is the Fund 27 or Special Education Fund, that number is up mostly due to salary and benefits for our special education staff. Debt service is actually the only fund with an arrow going down, so that number has decreased. We refinanced last year our Fund 38 debt, and so we have $1 million left of Fund 38 debt that are stretched out now through 2034 into smaller payments, right around $70,000 to $80,000 per year. So for the next 12 years or so, we will be having those Fund 38 debt payments. And that number, so that overall number with principal and interest comes out to $88,400. And then our food service, Fund 50, is actually budgeted a little higher, both on the revenue and expenditure side. We do expect increased meal participation, once again, due to our participation in the Seamless Summer option. So the last year and a half, we were in the Summer Food Service, or SFSP program. And that was enacted during the pandemic, and it basically allowed for any child in our district 18 and under to receive free school breakfast and lunch. Last year we did offer a pickup option, and we did offer meals over the summer as well. So our revenues and expenditures are actually predicted to be up. Additionally, the United States Department of Agriculture, which is the sponsor of the Seamless Summer option, has a higher reimbursement rate for meals, so our revenues will be up as well. And so we're projecting a balanced budget in Fund 50, but if we do end up ahead, that will further add to our fund balance in Fund 50, which can be used for like a larger scale project in our kitchen. And then Fund 46, as I mentioned at the beginning, we had to wait that 5 years for us to become eligible to use our Fund 46 account. So we passed that amount of time. So we do have some projects budgeted in there. I wrote $250,000 in there, but we do have the possibility for other projects, and we do have a decent amount of fund balance in Fund 46 that can be used to cover those. And so our gross total expenditures come out to a little bit over $20 million. And that number can be a little misleading because it does include the transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27 to cover special education costs. It also includes our transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 46, our long-term capital improvement plan fund. So the actual number I like to talk about is that net total expenditures is up compared to last year, coming in at $16,778,804. And as I mentioned, most of the arrows are pointing up, but on the one of the good bright spots of our budget is our mill rate is actually continuing to drop, which is good for property tax taxpayers. Our mill rate is projected to be $6.86, which is down from $7.31 last year. So I think that is usually a piece of news that taxpayers like to hear when the mill rate is staying flat or dropping. So, do I have any questions or comments on the budget?
So and that also can go for anybody in the audience also that would have questions. You feel free to ask if you do.
I'd like to thank you for finally explaining the mill rate in such a way that I understand it.
I'm glad. I've got a few minutes to spare underneath that 30-minute time limit. So.
You could save them for next year. Can you bank those?
I don't know. I'll have a different boss next year.
All right, so then that's the budget information session. Very shortly at 6 o'clock, we'll start the actual annual meeting, and much of what we'll talk about in the annual meeting will be a repeat of some of what we've done, but we'll take a quick little break and then be back and ready to start at 6 o'clock.
We need to officially adjourn though, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I move to adjourn at 5:57.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And we are adjourned.
This is so messed up. Just do this, and then
Hello, I call this meeting to order at exactly 6 PM. May I have I appoint the secretary, right? Okay. Steve, how do you feel about being appointed secretary?
Sure, I accept.
Excellent. Okay, and then I need a motion to elect a chairperson for the meeting.
It could be anybody.
It's typically me, but it could be anybody. So feel free to,
Right, but it has to be a resident.
you do have to be a resident, and you do have to do work. So, I mean, I'm not gonna stop you, but you will have to do stuff. So you wanna do, okay, great.
she's making an nomination.
Nominating you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I understand. Okay, so moved. Let's see, that was fun, wasn't it? Okay,
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Again, only residents can say aye, maybe raise your hand so I can see you. Okay, perfect. Opposed, and motion carries. Okay, we will continue. Clerk, could you read the notice of the meeting?
Oh, real quick, can you state your name for Diane over there for the minutes?
Sharon Honorable.
I got you, Diane over there. Saya.
Okay, clerk.
Yes. Here's a notice for the annual district meeting from section 120.08 subsection 1. Notice is hereby given to the qualified electors of the Salem School District that the annual meeting of said district for the transaction of business will be held at the Salem School District Middle School Gymnasium on the 26th day of October 2021 at 6 p.m., dated this 28th day of September 2021, and signed by Stephen Brown, District Clerk.
Great. Now, Mr. Clerk, can you read the minutes of the annual meeting of last year?
Sure, be glad to. The annual school district meeting minutes from October 27, 2020 was held at 6 p.m. in the Salem Grade School annual meeting. It was on the stage in the cafetorium. The meeting was called to order by Dana Powers at 6 p.m. Dana Powers appointed Stephen Brown as the secretary of the meeting. Election of the meeting. The floor was open to nominations for chairperson. Nick Poloni nominated Dana Powers as chairperson, seconded by Ted Gergen. A voice vote was taken and the motion carried. Steve Brown then read the notice of the meeting as the clerk for the annual meeting. Steve Brown, clerk, was asked to read the minutes of the annual meeting of October 7, 2019. Nick Poloni, Ted Gergen motioned to approve the 2019 annual meeting minutes. A voice vote was taken and the motion carried. Ted Gergen, treasurer, read the report of the auditor for the 2018-2019 school year. Ted Gergen and Nick Poloni motioned to approve the 2018-2019 audit report. A voice vote was taken and the motion carried. Dana Powers, as chairperson, asked Ted Gergen to present the treasurer's report for the 2019-2020 school year. Ted Gergen read the treasurer's report. Ted Gergen, Nick Poloni motioned to approve the 2019-2020 treasurer's report. A voice vote was taken and the motion carried. Dr. Connie Valenza, district administrator, presented the district report. Then Dana Powers, chairperson, asked Ted Gergen, treasurer, to present the 2020-2021 budget. Ted Gergen asked Susan Jarvis, business manager, to discuss the budget and address any questions from the audience. Susan Jarvis led a discussion of the proposed tax levy. Motion for the tax levy for the 2020-2021 school year. It was done by ballot. Ted Gergen and Steve Brown motioned that there will be levied a school tax assessed against all taxable properties within the district in the sum of $7,390,194, which includes a general fund 10 levy of $6,758,131, necessary to operate and maintain the Salem School District system and to finance the recommended budget for the 2020-2021 school year. 3 residents were appointed to tabulate the written ballots: Jack Nicolai, Ted Gergen, and Nick Poloni. Votes were tabulated and presented by Ted Gergen. The levy was approved by a vote of 5-0. Other business, Board of Education salary, Steve Brown and Nick Maloney motion that we pay each board member $100 for every monthly regular board meeting attended. A voice vote was carried, motion carried. Board of Education mileage, Nick Maloney and Steve Brown motion to set the mileage consistent with the IRS standard mileage rate. A voice vote was taken, motion carried. The 2021 annual meeting date and time was set. Ted Gergen and Nick Maloney's motion to set the 2021 annual meeting date for Tuesday, October 26, 2021 at 6 p.m. Other items as allowed by law were discussed. For adjournment, Nick Maloney and Ted Gergen motion to adjourn the meeting at 6:55 p.m. A voice vote was taken, the motion carried, and this was submitted by Stephen Brown, clerk.
Great, thank you. Make a motion to approve the minutes.
I move to approve the annual minutes as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Nick?
Super. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for all your help. Ted, could you please present the 2019-2020 audit report?
Oh, I would love to. Marquez, please feel free to jump in at any point. And again, this is a reminder that this audit report is from the 2019-20 year. And it's prepared by Sitzberger CPAs and business advisors. And we won't receive the current audit until December of this month. And then Marquez will kind of walk us through that report. And if anybody in the audience is interested in receiving an actual full copy of all 54 pages, you can reach out to Marquez in the business office and he can certainly grab you a copy of that. So just kind of quickly go through this. Again, this is a reminder that this is from the 2019-20 fiscal year. And it's an annual audit that's conducted from an external organization per Wisconsin Statute 120.14. And essentially it examines all the financial accounts to make sure that all the accounts are accurate and that there's transparency, that there's a third-party confirmation review of source documents and testing of sample transactions that happen within the district. So after the audit is completed, and I think that's a 3-day process from the auditors, after that happens, the auditors take time to prepare this document that reviews all of those transactions and all of our practices here within the district and gives that report, and it's related to things about how we handle cash, what those fund balances look like, and employment benefits and things like that. So if we look through this, I think we will probably find some commonalities that the auditors find every single year, and based on the size of our district, those will always be here. So if we look, and just to highlight that these aren't significant weaknesses within the organization's audit, but we will always have lack of segregation of duties, and really the only way to correct that is employing other people. And that's just something with our district size will never happen. You guys, anything on that one? No. All right. And then the second one that we typically will see is financial statement preparation. And again, this would require adding an auditor on site. So that would be a full-time auditor here in the building to prepare all of our financial documents. Again, the size of one building district will just never be feasible for Salem School. Number 3 is a material audit adjustment, and this is for the 2019-20 audit. And also just a reminder that Marquez was not present for any of these findings. So I know he's really excited to get our audit in December to make sure everything that he's put in place helps remedy some of these things. So again, that material audit adjustment really is looking at some of the entries that were placed that kind of basically had to go back and be corrected. They were either omitted or incorrect entries. So they're just going to make sure, again, that everything is accurate, and Marquez does a great job of following up with any questions that we have on the monthly treasurer's report, which should help remedy that situation. And then number 4, excess of expenditures over budgeted amounts. Again, this is the business office's responsibility just to make sure, and our role, to make sure that what we budget and what we spend are pretty close. And we saw the prepared budget, which we'll talk through a little bit here as well. So that's kind of where we're at. There were some things that have carried over from the 2018-19 audit into the 19-20 about licensure. This is not necessarily a financial thing, but just something that came up in the audit that's been remedied as well, just looking to make sure that all of our staff and faculty and staff have the correct licensure to work with students in their programs. So again, they have things, the administrative team has put things in place to make sure that that's all buttoned up as well. So that's where we are for the audit of the 2019-20 school year.
Wonderful. Ted, could you please present the treasure? Oh, I'm sorry, backtrack. I need a motion on
I
that.
would like to move to approve the 2019-2020 audit report as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Ted, could you please present the treasurer's report?
Absolutely.
Love the great attitude.
All right, we're going to take a look at the treasurer's report, year ended June 30th, 2021. And thank you, Marquez, for giving us all the information on what those different accounts are, because that factors into this information as well. So we're all well informed here. So we will take a look at the total revenues and expenditures of each of our fund accounts. So total revenues for General Fund 10 are $15,844,846.02. And the expenditures for General Fund 10 are $15,627,912.61. Special Projects Fund 21, the revenues were $6,355.19. And then total expenditures were $2,983.87. Special Education Fund 27, total revenues $934,580.23. Expenditures were $2,258,969.50. Debt Service Fund 38, with total revenues of $1,632,063. Expenditures are for Debt Service Fund 38 are $1,645,109.17. Capital Project Fund 46, total revenues $578.10. There were no expenditures for Fund 46. And Food Service Fund 50, total revenues of $548,986.93. and expenditures $526,933.91. You may have picked up on that there were some discrepancies between revenues and expenditures, which require some inter-fund transfers. So the inter-fund transfer out of Fund 10, the general fund, of $3,124,389.27 were transferred into Special Education Fund 27, and that transfer was $1,324,389.27. And then another interfund transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 46, the Capital Project Fund, of $1,800,000. Questions? I move to approve the treasurer's report for the year ending June 30th, 2021.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Dr. Valenza, could you please provide the district report?
Kind of the state of the district. A really important factor is this year is year 3 of our 3-year referendum impact. As you look back on the referendum, it's always important to me to share with the community the extent to which we're using the funds that were so generously granted to the district in the manner of which we shared with them that we would be using them. So if you take a look, the different years, we've already referred to that. This year, 2021-22, was to exceed the revenue limit by $3.6 million. The key to this is looking forward into the following year, which is the 2022-2023 school year. There'll be a drop in that revenue limit of $3.6 million. Approximately 1.1 of that over the revenue cap is going to be needed just to even keep the lights on, the doors open, maintain salary and wage matrix and competitive benefits. So obviously there'll be some significant discussion over the course of the next year related to that. Right. Oh, so I read it wrong. Approximately $1.5 million over the revenue cap is needed annually to keep the lights on, doors open, and maintain salary and wage matrix. So just a couple of the projects that were big over this last summer that we did. We put that new roof over the upper 5th grade and upper intermediate. This was one of the facilities maintenance things that we talked about being done in the referendum. We replaced the elevator mechanism, which was a pretty costly project, but something required by code in order to bring that up to code for us. The 2 floors going between the 1st and 2nd floor over kind of in those early primary grade levels over there. And did a lot of the summer seal coating, curb, and concrete repair were kind of the big ticket items. We've got some kind of on the docket going into fall, replacement of well tanks, replacement of some of our air handling units. So that was what some of that money that was dedicated in the referendum will go to going forward. We also made a promise to the community that we would use some of that money to reduce our class sizes, and we have done that pretty significantly. If you look at our 5K in that 21, 22, when I first came to the district that first year, we were in that 25, 26 mark. And sometimes I think when you're not necessarily in that classroom, the difference of 4 or 5 kids may not seem so much. But if you ask our staff, there's a huge difference in a kindergarten classroom between 20 and 21 and 25. Again, looking at 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, keeping our class sizes pretty significant. And, you know, especially even looking back at last year when dealing with the pandemic and trying to create some space within classrooms based on the information that we had at that point. So that was one of the significant kind of areas of work and financial support that we put that referendum money into. We also did some significant curriculum updating, expanding our new math program, a new reading program, new phonics program, teaching with technology support in programming, increasing staff collaboration time so that if I'm in one 5th grade classroom, that I feel pretty confident that in another 5th grade classroom, the students are getting the same curriculum, they're getting that same level of support, and they have the same level of expectation from classroom to classroom. And then something new this year that we added was our full day 4K. That's not a full day 5-day a week, it is a full day 4-day a week program. And again, as we talk in a little bit about some of our standardized test scores and that kind of thing, the goal of getting kids started early and providing support for students so that that gap that has occurred in the past is less likely to occur between our students, so providing that additional support at that level. The pandemic effect had an effect in every district pretty much across the state. The last time we had a normal school year that included testing would be back in 1819. It's always interesting when you take a look at, there's kind of a chart out there going around that talks about, for example, if you were in 3rd grade, when was your last normal school year? And it's kind of shocking how, you know, how that has looked over the years. But it definitely had an impact. I think what is noticeable about Salem is, although disappointingly our test scores did drop over that period of time, the extent to which they dropped, with the exception of math, was actually quite a bit less than the state average and quite a bit less than some of the surrounding districts. So although we certainly don't want to see a drop in how well our students perform, I think that that drop, in most cases with the exception of math, was less than many districts experienced, and a testament to how hard our teachers really work to try and meet the needs of students. Math was an interesting one to take a look at, and certainly something that we as a district are going to try and address. I think one of the factors that played a role in the math testing was that we had a program that was very interactive and required students being able to engage and interact with each other with manipulatives and that kind of thing. So if you think about the first spring of the pandemic, our students were totally virtual, and that was very difficult to kind of carry out that program for our students. And then even going into last year, where we had a good number of our students whose families still chose to have them in virtual, and trying to provide that level of support for students definitely extended that achievement gap for our students and gave us an area that we're going to be putting significant work towards this school year. So with that, I will turn it back over to the money talk.
All right, so I know we talked about this already in the budget hearing, and Ted did a wonderful job reading over last year's budget, so I just want to highlight a couple things, and I won't, hopefully not repeat as much. I'll try to avoid repeating as much as possible. So this is a revenue and expense summary, and once again, broken down first by the general fund and then by all fund expenditures. As I mentioned earlier, our fund balance over the course of the 2021 school year increased a little more than $200,000, and that was due to a couple different things, but most notably the increase in our operating referendum, but also there was, like I said, some costs that were less than expected, including transportation, because we had less students in person last year. Total revenues came out to $15,844,846, and expenses for Fund 10 for the 2021 school year were $15,627,912.61. Then the all fund expenses, besides the general fund, we had the special projects fund, most of which was Fund 27. Ted had pointed out that there was a significant gap between the revenues in Fund 27 and the expenses, and that's that interfund transfer between 10 and 27. So we do get aided for our special education costs at about 26% of our special education costs, and then we also do get some federal grant money as well for special education through IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And then whatever the difference is there between the revenues we get from the state at that 26% reimbursement and the federal revenue, the district is on the hook for, and we do that transfer from Fund 10 to 27. For our debt service, that number looks pretty big, that 1.6 million. And that actually is a little inflated because last year we did that refinancing. So we actually, to me, it's about $1 million inflated. We did have revenues and expenditures that offset each other, but that's why there was a significant drop in that debt service as well. Capital projects, we had no expenses, and I think when Ted read it out, we had a couple $100 in revenue in Fund 46, and that, not including the transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 46, we do get a little bit of interest on the money that we have in our Fund 46 account. Obviously, interest is not a major source of revenue, especially given interest rates nowadays. So there are some options to kind of invest that money if we don't have plans to use it in the immediate future, and that's something I will be bringing up later in the school year. And obviously, yeah, with inflation projected, over the next year or whatever, we do want to make sure we're not losing, our money that's in our accounts is not losing value relative to inflation. And then food service, as I mentioned, it was significantly up from the 1920 school year, and it's also projected to increase further this year. And that's thanks in part to those. Last year it was the summer food service program, and this year it's the seamless summer option that allows us to provide meals free of charge to all of our students. And we do also have a higher reimbursement rate, which helps us ensure that we aren't losing money through our food service program. I look back in some of the past years, we actually had to do a transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 50 to cover any losses we had in food service. So if our expenses were more than what we were getting reimbursed, We had to do a transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 50. We have not had to do that the last 2 years, and are not expecting to have to do that again this year. And any amount that we have in excess revenue can be added to our food service fund balance and be used for expenses for our food service program in the future. And then, as I pointed out, the gross total expenditures was a little over 20 million, and the net total expenditures, once you take out those interfund transfers, which are basically, you know, transfers between your accounts, came out to $15,937,519.79. So this little graph breaks up the 2021 expenses by what we call in Woofer the object. And so there are 9 different object categories. The two, usually the 2 largest together are salaries and employee benefits. And this is only for Fund 10. So you can see salaries made up 37% of the expenditures, and employee benefits made up another 16.5%. So to combine, that's more than half, almost 60%. The other thing I want to point out is that we have that big transfers amount for 20,000 or 20%, and that includes that transfer to Fund 27, which is also sizable, which is mostly made up of salaries and employee benefits. So that salaries and employee benefits amount is actually even larger than what it appears in this pie chart. And then purchase services is the other major chunk at 18% of our Fund 10 expenses. And that includes our transportation, which we typically spend just a smidge over $500,000 in transportation costs, which is pretty high compared to most districts, especially our size. But given our geography, it's kind of an inevitable cost of K-8 district with our highways intersecting and things like that. And then the other large portion of the purchase services is actually our open enrollment payments out to other districts. So when we have residents that live here in the Salem boundaries but attend schools outside of Salem, we have to pay the open enrollment revenue, or we have an open enrollment expense to those other districts, and that makes up a sizable chunk of that green part of the pie chart. And then, as you can see, the remaining amounts of the pie chart are pretty small. We've got a small section for non-capital objects, so those are supplies and smaller, basically mostly supply expenses. And then we have a small chunk for insurance and other objects, which it's kind of a catch-all for anything that doesn't fit in those other categories. So items affecting the 2021 general operations budget. So at a high level, just kind of wanted to talk about some of those important highlights from the 2020-2021 Fund 10 or general operations budget. So our student membership last year decreased. So from 1920 to 2021, we did have a decrease, and that was a trend that occurred in a majority of Wisconsin school districts. I think statewide, there were thousands of less students counted last year. Some people kept their kids homeschooled, some people didn't send their kids to school, and so we did experience a decrease in our membership. And as I mentioned, we did kind of have the same FTE number, even though we actually have more kids back in seats now. A larger portion of that is made up of 4K, which when they do that FTE calculation, is not counted as a full FTE. Revenues increased, as I mentioned, due to our referendum. We had ESSER funds last year of $110,000, most of which we used towards purchasing technology that we used to provide virtual instruction to our students, and also other things that came along with kind of moving more online and virtual. And then we did have an increase in state aid. So as I mentioned, this 21-22 and 22-23, there is no increase in the revenue limit per pupil amount. Last year there was, and so that was another reason why our revenues were higher in 2020-2021 compared to 19-20. Expenses increased due to increased teacher compensation schedule. So we have a teacher compensation schedule or matrix, and as people move further in their career, they move up the schedule, and so that is an expense that typically happens every year, Additionally, CPI increased 1.81%. We had a health insurance increase, which we'll talk about a little later. And then ESSER expenses, ESSER eligible expenses, as I mentioned, specifically related to, a lot of it was related to technology that was needed to provide that virtual instruction. And then we did have a transfer to our Fund 46 long-term capital improvement fund. And then another thing I wanted to point out, because I think this has come up in past board meetings, and something I want to highlight, it's going to become a smaller and smaller expense as time goes on, is retiree benefit costs. And so in 1920, the total amount of retiree benefit costs that we had came out to $513,000, and that number decreased to $491,000 in 2020, 2021. That number is going to further decrease in this 2021-2022 budget, and every year until the remainder of the retirees fall off of the benefit schedule. So, obviously we're thankful for the time and contributions those retirees made, but that cost going away eventually will free up more money for instruction and things for our students presently.
Do you know what year that will be?
I don't have it. I don't have the schedule on me, but I think within the next 5 years, it goes down to one person. So it'll become very small. We'll talk more about that in December with the presentation of the audit, because that's one of the things the auditors look at is our retiree benefits. And then additionally, still staying on the 2020-2021 budget, so this is last year's budget, we did have a decrease in transportation costs due to fewer students being in person. Our technology, as I mentioned, not only did we fund some of that with ESSER money, but then we also used some of it from our non-ESSER, just regular general operations budget. Open enrollment out decreased last year by 3 students, and open enrollment in also decreased by 14 students. We'll talk about open enrollment in the next couple slides as we move into the 21-22 budget. And then lastly, the food service expenses. Like I said, it was a sizable increase. Our food service expenses from 1920 to 2020-21 increased 33.9%, which is significant anytime something increases that much. But our revenues actually increased by an even slightly higher amount, 36.6%, because the summer food service program had a higher reimbursement rate, and we were able to increase our Fund 50 fund balance by a little over $30,000. So that will eventually come in handy, if some refrigerator goes out or any sort of large equipment item in the kitchen goes out or needs to be replaced. So now moving to the 21-22 budget summary. This slide is an exact copy from the budget hearing, so I won't go too much into detail, but as I had mentioned before, fund balance is up from last year. Revenues and expenditures are also up. Revenues are slightly higher than the expenditures, and that is to keep our fund balance at that 15%, which is board policy. And then the ending fund balance ends up going up a little more than, it's about $27,000. And then going into a little more detail, this one was also covered previously at the budget hearing, and this one just is looking at the expenditures across all the funds. Fund 10, we just want to highlight again that 4K expansion that did come with increased costs, and it's not fully reimbursed because those 4K students aren't counted as a full FTE, but it's an investment that we think will pay off in the long run with additional students coming into our district and hopefully providing a better learning experience for our students that we should see in future years. Fund 27, special education and student activity, saw an increase, and then just want to highlight debt service is back down to a level that it'll be for Fund 38, that it'll be for the foreseeable future. Due to the refinancing, we got a very good interest rate, and of course I didn't write that down, but it was significantly less than what it was prior. And then the final arrow at the bottom trending down is that mill rate. down to $6.86, which is, again, a sizable drop from the $7.31 last year.
Because just a question about the mill rate, which has dropped. How does that compare to other districts here in the area?
I can't, I don't know for sure, because not everybody has finalized their mill rate yet, but I would hypothesize that most districts are going to see a drop in their mill rate. I know ours is down significantly, and from what I've seen from the districts that have already finalized, ours looks like it's slightly more than other districts, but once again, I won't know until the end of the month once all the levies are finalized.
Thank you.
And one of the reasons why the mill rate dropped is, as I mentioned, our property values for the school boundaries is over $1 billion. That amount increased by, I think it was a little more than 7%, and our revenue limit only increased by 6%. So that difference is why the mill rate is dropping. So property values essentially outpaced what our revenue limit was.
Well, in any case, lower is better than higher.
Correct, yep.
Okay.
If you looked at, we don't know what the mill rate is for all of the districts in the area, but if you go back to last year, we were very much middle of the road.
Right.
So if you took the districts that surrounded us, we fell right about in the middle on our mill rate.
Right. Thank you.
All right, and then just kind of wanted to highlight some talking points for the 21-22 budget, and this is general operations or Fund 10. Our student membership FTE was actually the exact same amount as last year, so unlike the previous year where it had dropped, it has what we call stabilized following this pandemic. But as I had mentioned, the revenue limit uses a 3-year average, so now that we have a higher number fell off and was replaced by a lower number, so that 3-year average dropped. So ideally, we'll hopefully see that FTE number creep back upwards in future years. But then I mentioned it won't necessarily be offset by an increase automatically in revenue because we'll lose that exemption. We did see increased summer school enrollment. I think I mentioned that earlier, from summer 2020 to summer 2021. The summer 2020 FTE was 0, and we brought that number back up to 15 FTE. So when I say 15 FTE for summer school, that might sound like a little bit, but I think we had about 186 students participate in summer school. The way they calculate the FTE for summer school is by the number of instructional minutes provided, and so I actually just did the calculation today again, but I don't know, there was 100,000, several hundred thousand number of minutes, and I think like 70,000 minutes counts as 1 FTE, so that's how we got to the 15 FTE. Health insurance rates are projected to increase significantly. Last year we had a 126% loss ratio, which from an insurance speak is not a good thing. So we are projecting an increase, significant increase in our health insurance rates. We'll talk more about that later. And as some of you may have heard in the news, people are talking about inflation. So there are some inflationary increases built in, especially in areas of fuel costs for transportation, supplies, maintenance projects, and other services that we pay for. We kind of built a percentage in for that. Open enrollment in, the number of students open enrolling in from other school districts increased, which is a great thing because that means we get revenue then from those other school districts. That came out to a little more than $200,000 of additional revenue from that. And then kind of the flip side of that is Salem residents open enrolling out to other districts. That the number of students that did that actually decreased as well. And so we actually have fewer expenses to pay out to other districts, also about that same $200,000 amount. So in net total, that's like a $400,000 swing in the right direction. So, and I think we've talked about open enrollment in the past, and that gap between, we have a larger number of students open enrolling out than we have in, and that gap is shrinking, and something that we hope to continue shrinking and reversing that trend. ESSER funds, as I mentioned last year, we had ESSER 1. That was the first round of stimulus funding. That was about $110,000. We spent all of that. So now we have ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. There's 3 rounds of this ESSER funds. ESSER round 2 is $436,000, and round 3 is $979,000. And those all have to be spent by the 2023-2024 fiscal year. As you can see, some districts might spend it all in 1 year if they have the right projects or right reasons to. Another strategy is to kind of spread it out over 3 years so you don't kind of feel that big drop off after that first year. And if you do use it to replace something like technology, you also have to think about replacement costs in the future as well. So there's a lot of things to think about. And as we move further into the school year, we will be getting some staff, family, and community input into how we should be spending those monies. That's one of the stipulations to that, those ESSER 2 funds. So that will be coming down the road. As I had also mentioned, there is no state increase in the revenue limit for this year or for next year at this point. And I think the logic behind that at the state level was you guys are getting this federal money, so you should be all right. It's not quite that simple, but at this point we're doing fine. And then CPI is right now, well, it's been finalized for this school year at 1.23%, which is not bad, especially for all the talk about inflation. However, looking ahead to next year, CPI, the way it's looking, is projected to be somewhere between 4 and 5%. And that would be, I think, one of the highest increases in CPI ever recorded. So that's just something we don't have to worry about for the 21-22 budget, but in 22-23 budget, that will be something we have to consider, which is going to be made more difficult by the fact that we don't have that increase in the revenue limit. So. Fund balance, so that's kind of I think a lot of times people think of fund balance as like what you have in an account just sitting in an account doing nothing, but it's really not. It's as of June 30th each year, they look at your fund balance, and it's not actually cash. It's there's receivables coming in from projected revenue that is coming in from property taxes. So we get our final property tax payments in August, but we book those to the previous fiscal year because we know the exact amount that they're going to be. We have revenues coming in from state grants, federal grants. So that fund balance isn't actually a real number, it's more of an accounting number. But the way they measure the fund balance is by looking at it in terms of your expenditures. And so our board policy is to keep the fund balance at 15% or higher. And so you can see here, this is a historical chart of the fund balance dating back to the 2016 to 2007 school year. And we've, for the most part, been able to maintain that 15% fund balance percentage. And as I had mentioned, when I initially had done the budget, the fund balance had actually dropped to like 14.98%. And so we had to reduce our expenditures by like $26,000 to get back up into that 15% range. And this is just an estimate as of this time with the budget, but that's the goal right there, to keep that at 15%. And I should also mention that having a higher fund balance theoretically means that you do have a little bit more cash on hand. Like I said, it's not an exact number, but it does reduce the amount we have to short-term borrow, which also comes with costs. So there is a good reason to having a significant fund balance, or at least at 15%. It also comes into play when you do issue debt. It's sort of like having the down payment on a house. You get a better mortgage rate depending if you have more money or less money on the down payment. It does come in handy for that as well.
Just a side note to that, one of the things they look at, and that's why it's important that we keep an eye on our policy, is that you're following your board policy as it relates to fund balance, and that's one of the bigger factors that goes into your overall credit rating. And so that's why the importance of making sure that we're following that board policy related to fund balance.
I think I only have a couple slides left. So we have the tax levy component slide. So this is a 5-year history kind of showing the makeup of that property tax levy. So I have a couple different colors here indicating different sections of what the levy is. So that lighter blue color on the bottom is the general operations fund, Fund 10. The orange fund is the amount that comes in through the operating referendum. And then the gray bar that has been decreasing over time, and you can barely see in the 21-22 school year and moving forward, is our Fund 38 energy efficiency debt. As I mentioned, we refinanced that last year, and now we got it down into small payments in the $70,000 to $80,000 range for the next 12 years. We did in the past have Fund 39 debt for some projects dating well back into the past. And that was that darker blue section of the bar chart in the previous years, and that has gone away. We no longer have Fund 39 debt. And then at the top there, we have the total levy amount, and as you can see, it's increased every year, though the pace at which it's increased is slowing down. Obviously, that is also related to our enrollment has kind of stabilized at this point, and should our enrollment go back up, we would get our revenue limits should still continue to keep going up, and the tax levy portion would also coincide with going up. But then going back to the mill rate, it's all going to be dependent on how are the property values looking, and if property values outpace the tax levy, then the mill rate will continue to drop. I did want to point out that I had mentioned this earlier. We had a publication in the newspaper with our proposed budget at that point in time prior to the October 15th state aid certification. So since that original document was published, it also had the notice of the annual meeting and the budget hearing. We did have new information come in that included the student membership counts for third Friday of September, the fall 2021 property values, the state aid number was certified on October 15th, and then just some other miscellaneous information that was also going into the revenue limit, such as the voucher amounts, private school voucher amounts, which is still relatively small. All in all, I was within I had to change the amount by $20,269, which in the scope of like a $16 million budget is a fraction, a very small fraction, but I did want to point that out in case anybody was wondering. Oh, I saw on the original publication the revenue limit was this much, or the tax levy was this much, and now it's actually shrunk. So our tax levy came down a little bit between what was published and what is being proposed here. And once again, I think we would. If anybody has any input or questions, we are here to answer questions.
I'll just step up to the mic. Please state your name and address, please.
Eric Belly. I'm at 7722-256A. There is a couple times you mentioned a 3-year referendum. When does that expire, and what is going to be done to continue that?
Good question.
So it actually expires at the end of this year. Hopefully you'll be able to stay for our board meeting that follows this, because we're going to be talking a little more in depth about that. Right now we are kind of looking at what some of the options are, and it's really going to be a little bit of an educational process, both with the board and with our community members over these next couple months to make a decision as to what the community would like to see us to do going forward into next year. Likely, there will be some sort of a referendum in the spring of this year. What that will look like will depend very much on the feedback we get from our community members, our families, our staff. But I would assume it's in the best interest of the district to look at doing something this next spring related to that. So stay tuned. We're certainly going to be talking a little bit more about some of the options at the board meeting that follows this annual meeting. And we'll be having lots of conversations in the next couple months with engaging our community around that. So thank you for asking.
Anything else? Great.
I'd like to make a motion. Madam Chairperson, I move there be levied a school tax assessed against all taxable properties within the district in the sum of $7,435,583, which includes a general fund 10 levy of $7,347,827 necessary to operate and maintain the district school system and to finance the recommended budget for the 2021-2022 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Great. So now how we're going to do this is I'm going to appoint 3 residents. So if you wouldn't mind just raising your hand if you want to help me out with anything. No. Okay. Do you guys don't care, do you? Okay. And, yep, Diane can pick the 3rd one. Oh, I'm sorry, you're not doing that. Okay, Pam, is that Pam? Okay, it's hard to tell, okay. And your friend here? Kendra. And then either one of you 2 gentlemen, whichever one wants to. Okay, great. So if you guys could be my counters and collectors.
Watch this one. Banged against the wall.
So if you are a resident, you simply check yes or no. And then our fine volunteers will pick them up from you, and then they will be counted.
Let's pass it down here.
No sleight of hand, Jack.
No sleight of hand. My hands never leave my wrists. Board ballots are here. There's no rush. Hurry up.
Sharp.
Thank you.
See, I need their names,
Yes.
don't I?
Yep, so you can count wherever you, perfect. Oh, you don't have to
First time
leave.
we've had the
Okay, it'd probably be best if you don't leave.
Receivers.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't get their names. That's
Oh, I'm assuming. Diane, did you get their names? No, okay. So one of them is Pam Llewellyn.
Pam.
When they come back. L-U-E,
Yeah, we should.
L-U-E, L-L-E-N,
You.
E, L-L-E-N, E-N. Yep, that's one.
That was your
Yep.
last name? Okay.
12 yeses and 0 nos. Perfect,
And your
thank
name,
you.
please, again? Okay, thank you.
And Kendra, what was your last name? Smith. Easy to remember.
Smith?
Smith.
Got it.
good to go.
Perfect. Okay, so,
Yeah, to Diane.
yep. Okay, so motion
Thank you.
carries with 12-0 votes.
I think that's the largest vote count I've ever had on an annual meeting since I've been on the board.
Aaron, how do you
So it's
spell your
cool.
last name?
Linna.
Very good, thank you, sir.
Okay, now we will have a discussion on the school board salaries. Currently, the board is receiving $100 per meeting, and just to clarify, that is per regular meeting, so that's 1 meeting per month. So we can. Yeah, it's not just any meeting we have, it's tied to the regular board meetings. So we can certainly discuss, or I will entertain a motion.
I motion to keep the monthly pay for board members at $100 per regular scheduled board meeting.
So moved. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now, we will discuss reimbursement of mileage for board members. Currently, we are reimbursed based on the IRS standard mileage.
I move to set the mileage consistent with the IRS standard mileage rate.
So moved.
Sharon?
Is that Sharon?
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. See,
Well,
this
to be
is
fair,
fun,
it's
guys.
not your first time being on some sort of voting committee for the most part, correct?
There you go. Okay, now we will establish the annual board meeting date for 1 year from now. The state law sets the date as the fourth Monday of July at 8 p.m. unless changed, which we typically do because it's a lot easier to do the annual meeting when it comes closer to October 31st. So that would be October 25th, 2020, unless anybody wants to change that date.
Is that a motion?
Super. Oh, no, go ahead.
I move to set the 2022 annual meeting date for October 27th, 2022.
25th. 25th.
What is, I'm sorry, the 25th.
25th.
I'm sorry.
At 6 p.m. Is that what we did? At 6 p.m.? Okay, so moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And motion carries. Other items allowed by law. Is that just,
It would be typically like if you were going to be selling some property or looking at purchasing property, or there are other types of things, but there's no recommendation for anything additional
We'll keep our property.
for now.
great, then I will move to adjourn the meeting at 6:57. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we are adjourned. Thanks, guys. Good evening. I call this meeting to order at 7:02. We've got board members present here tonight. Okay, so Jack is here. He's just not here presently. So should we, you know what, you guys can figure that out. So we have Jack Nicolai, Steve Brown, myself, Dana Powers, Nick Poloni, and Ted Gergen. And here is Jack, so we're good. There are no more board members absent, administration present. We've got the whole gang here tonight. Marquez, Connie, I'm just gonna be informal. And then we have Ryan, Judy, and Patty, and Diane, of course. Visitors present, make sure that you have signed in. Sorry, I'm just second guessing myself. Please sign in there. I have a separate sign in for if you wanted to provide a comment tonight. And if you could please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I will take a motion on the agenda.
A motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, and motion carries. You guys feel kind of left out now that you don't get to. Okay, President's report. Okay, it's that time of year where we get to nominate a WASBA representative. WASBA. And I would like to nominate Steve.
Second that.
We
Is
need
it
to
a
take vote,
motion?
right?
No? All right.
Looks like we all nominate you, and we would love for you to be our rep.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. I do not have anything else to report on, so Steve, will go right into you with correspondence.
And I have no correspondence whatsoever.
Fantastic. Ted.
All right, I'd like to read the treasurer's report dated September 2021. Take a look at the ending balance in each account. General fund cash account of $719,685.35. Credit card account with balance of $8,283.36. EBC Flex and HRA cash account, $6,723.36. Capital Improvement Fund, again, Fund 46, $2,081,620.45. Petty cash, $200.
What? What happened to the other $200?
Must have been transferred.
Marquez, I'm gonna need a line by line.
It's there for the treasurer's report.
It's been 400 for how long?
Next month, that bottom line will just totally fall off because there won't be a previous month ending down.
And LGIP, $1,578,555.58 for grant asset total for September 2021 of $4,395,068.08. I'd like to move to approve the treasurer's report dated September 2021 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, and motion carries.
All right, we'll take a look at the payment of accounts payable bills dated September 24th, 2021 through October 22nd, 2021. These include checks numbered 70530 through 70611 and 202-10018 through 202-100-246 for a total of the checks of $532,954.06. And just to kind of talk quickly through last month's treasurer's report, there were a couple checks that weren't included in the treasurer's report. Marquez got back to us. That's check 202-10075 was a reissue check from a previous statement, and it ended up in a different fiscal year, which triggered some other things that happened to include those other two missing checks. To summarize it very succinctly, Marquez had a much longer explanation of it to make sure that everything is good there. So I move to approve the payment of account payable bills 9/24/21 through 10/22/21.
So moved.
Hold on, I just got one question real quick, actually, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Gourmet Gorilla for a 7-day pantry box. Is that some sort of cafeteria something, I'm going to guess?
Yes, so we worked with Gourmet Gorilla over the summer to provide meal delivery boxes to families that couldn't pick up meals. And so that was the final invoice for that. But we did get reimbursed then for providing those meals at a slightly higher rate. So we actually, similar to most of our food service with the reimbursements, the revenue came out slightly higher than the expenses. So
Okay, yeah,
yep, that was the final invoice.
Do we get some sort of kickback from Amazon?
We do have a business account, and there is, with the business account, we get better pricing than what the average, like what we would have on our personal accounts. We do get free shipping, and there's a couple other small benefits, but we don't have, I don't think we have any sort of rewards with them.
It's just
We
it's
do.
like 2 full line items, which is great. Love Amazon. Just wondering.
It is a good reminder for community members to sign
Do
up
that
for
Smile.
for Salem.
You guys aware of that? The PTO, I feel like the PTO knows a lot about that if you want to reach out to them. Just, hey, money's money, right? Okay, so I have a motion and a second, so all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and motion carries. Okay,
We have a set of minutes from our regular board meeting, 9/28/2021, as printed and amended.
I move to approve the minutes of the regular school board meeting, September 28th, 2021, as printed and amended.
so moved. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain?
Oh, were you not there then?
It was when I was in a bit of a lockdown
That's right,
situation.
that's right, that's right. Okay, apologies, abstention and motion carries.
I move to approve the minutes.
Sorry. I was looking at the wrong person. I'm like, what's next, Connie? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Minutes of the special school board meeting, October 13th, 2021, as printed and amended.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, and motion carries. And last one.
Minutes of the special school board meeting retreat work session, 10/20/2021, as printed and amended.
I move to accept the special school board meeting for October 20th, 2021 as printed.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, and
Abstain? Yep.
Motion carries. Okay, public comments. Sharon Palmaville, you signed up to speak. Just if you could say your name and your address, please.
My name is Sharon Palmaville. Address is 8312 252nd Avenue in Salem. I am your county board supervisor, #1 for the Salem and Paddock Lake area. And I'm also the director of the Sharing Center in Trevor, which is our area's crisis center and resource center. And I had a couple things I wanted to talk to you about tonight. #1, I think we, as the Sharing Center and Salem Green School, may have made history this past summer. So what had happened when we were talking about Gorilla to Go and the seamless summer food option where you actually get reimbursed a little bit higher than the cost for a summer meal for students? What had happened was, what also was in effect, something called a congregate eating requirement, which was removed because of COVID, which made it so you could serve meals outside of a school, outside of a rec center, where you could actually do home delivery of food or grab and goes like Salem has done for a couple summers now. And so what had happened is we at the Sharing Center had the opportunity to be part of a pilot program to home deliver meal boxes to students. And so we were not part of the financial, we didn't do the delivery, we were just there to liaison between students in the community and the vendor, which was Gourmet Gorilla. And what I was so impressed with, both the administration and the staff, and you as the board, I'm sure you had plenty to do with this as well, is how willing you were to try to do something different in order to serve your students and also to collaborate with others in the community to really make sure that students were fed for the summer. So what I had seen from your district administrator is she actually offered 4 ways that students could eat during the summer should they choose to. Some schools did 1, some schools did none. You guys did 4, which I was just highly impressed with. And what we did as a collaboration between the summer meals you served here and the summer meals we were able to distribute through this Gourmet Gorilla food program. Right here in Western Kenosha County for the summer, we served 150,000 summer meals to students. And I'm pretty sure that's a historical marker for our part of the community. I don't know if that's ever happened before. I think the only one that's ever come close is you guys, and it was probably last summer. I don't know what your numbers were there, and I'm not going to put you on the spot. I just know that you guys were knocking it out of the park every time I looked. And so I just want to commend everyone for doing such a wonderful job to making sure that students were fed. And I got to honestly tell you, when we were registering students, we hit the max for that pilot program in 3 days. And should we have been able to continue to register students, I'm guessing we would have probably registered between 5,000 and 8,000 students for the summer. But we capped out at 1,000 for this pilot program. And I learned a lot about trying to launch a pilot program in a pandemic. That was a whole nother challenge in itself. And aside from all the bumps and challenges we had, it still was 86,000 meals that were served through this program. Combined with yours, we topped over 150,000 meals. So I want to thank you for that, and to your staff, and to your administration, and to you as a board for allowing them to, be inventive and creative and try to meet the needs in our community.
Great.
And the second thing I want to say too is, before I knew Connie well, not the summer, but the one before, there was some dad kept funding for food in our community during the pandemic. And I got an email one day from somebody here at the school. I didn't realize who she was. She says, "Do you need some milk?" And I said, "Yeah, I could use some milk," because currently we could only access that milk if we drove to Milwaukee every week to pick it up, and I'm not going to do that because that's a hike. And she ended up, after hours, on her own time, she delivered as much milk as we could possibly distribute over to our food pantry for the entire summer for the length of the program. So I just want to commend her and her staff who also made that happen, because it made such a big difference. And so just thank you for all you do. And our thanks to Connie. We're going to miss you. It was just an absolute joy to work with you for the last few years. Thank you for that. And you as well, sir, very responsive. Thank you for that. Whenever I had questions or was in need of assistance. But again, just thanks for your collaboration.
Sharon, I just want to say thank you for all that you do and the Sharing Center does for our community and for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Sharon. Okay. Connie?
So all these numbers that you've seen like 3 times this evening, we get to go over them one more time to official them, so.
All right, let's see if I can highlight some other points to these numbers.
New stuff.
So 2021, 2022 budget summary, this again is just the general fund, Fund 10. Beginning fund balance of $2,509,413.03, which is up from last year's beginning fund balance by approximately $200,000. Total revenues for the Fund 10 budget for 21-22, $16,931,019. Total expenditures of $903,550. There's a slight, the revenues are slightly higher than the expenditures, and once again, that is to maintain our 15% fund balance per board policy. And moving on to all funds, all the funds budgeted expenditures. I'm not going to repeat the general fund, but moving on to our special project funds, 27 and 21. total budgeted expenditures of $2,596,645. Debt service, budgeted expenditures, and that's Fund 38, of $88,400. Food service, Fund 50, budgeted expenditures of $530,000. Capital projects, Fund 46, budgeted expenditures of $250,000, for total gross expenditures across all funds for 2021-2022 of $20,368,595, and net total expenditures, so that's excluding the transfers out of Fund 10, comes out to $16,778,804. And do also want to highlight again, for any taxpayers in the room and streaming in, that our mill rate is down, I think this is either the 5th or 6th consecutive year, down to $6.86, and it was $7.31 in the previous year. And then some key points or items affecting the budget, and this is once again general operations, Fund 10. Student membership is the FTE that goes into the revenue limit calculation is the exact same as last year, and so we're saying it's stabilized somewhat from following the pandemic, which saw a big drop last year. Hopefully we're gonna kind of go back to the way it used to be, and we'll see increases in the student membership count in future years. And we did see us reverse that trend of that decrease last year with an increase in our summer school enrollment FTE. Health insurance rates are projected to increase significantly for the 21-22 budget due to our loss ratio of 126%. We do have some inflationary increases built into our expenditures, as we were expected to pay higher costs for fuel, supplies, maintenance projects, and other areas. Our open enrollment in students and revenue have both increased, and our open enrollment out has decreased. And I think those are two positives that we've seen so far this school year. We do have ESSER funds. Round 1 was spent last year. It was about $110,000. We do have access to round 2 of this year of $436,000, and we don't quite have access to the round 3 funding. That'll be forthcoming, but we do have to make sure we spend all 3 of those rounds by the 23-24 fiscal year. Do want to point out that we do not have any increase in our per pupil revenue limit amount, and we are not anticipating any increase next year as well. CPI for this budget we have built in at 1.23%, and that was finalized back in July. And we are looking ahead at next year's budget. One of the things we will have to be creative and overcome is higher than normal CPI, somewhere in the 4 to 5% range that it's anticipated at this time. Tax levy. This chart shows a 5-year history. The total levy for the 2021-22 school year as proposed is $7,435,583. There is a small gray piece of the stacked bar chart in the 21-22, but it's I think it's $88,000. So it's a very small amount. You can barely see it, but the majority of that is the Fund 10 tax levy. And if you take it up.
So at this point then, the annual meeting serves as the prelude and advisory vote as it relates to the overall budget. But the board then does need to come through and finalize and approve the actual budget and levy based on the property valuation and state aid finalization.
I move to approve the 2021-22 projected budget and levy of school tax assessed against all taxable properties within the district in the sum of $7,435,583, which includes a general fund 10 levy of $7,347,827, necessary to operate and maintain the district school system and to finance the recommended budget for the 2021-2022 school year.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And motion carries.
The next item on the agenda that we have is Third Friday Count. This is an extremely important number that we do every year because all of our state funding is based on what our overall student numbers are. This is a chart that I'm not expecting anyone to see, but it does kind of go through the number of students that we have actually sitting in seats. So in other words, the students that live in Salem and attend Salem, the students that are living outside of Salem, but are open enrolling into the Salem School District, and that combined becomes what we call our students in seats number. That number is at 1010, which is a nice increase from where we were last year. I think we talked a little bit about overall in that 3-year kind of rolling average, it doesn't seem like much. But we'll be talking a little bit later in terms of where those kids come from and why that's important to us. But as it stands, that's kind of where we're at in our overall numbers right now. And then looking at the next one would be our open enrollment students out. Again, when I came to the district, there was a significant imbalance in the number of students that went to other districts compared to the number of students coming in. Lots of reasons probably for that, but one of the very complicating factors of K-8 districts is their boundaries are very close in proximity, and we actually have students who, for example, live in our district but are actually closer to Bristol schools. So it is a complicating factor in a district like ours, and I think it's somewhat complicated also by the fact that we are the largest K-8 in the state. So we are a larger K-8 district. The good news is, though, that that's seen it's coming together. That gap is going away a little bit. If you take a look of our total students open enrollment in, this year we had 107. If you go back 5 years, we only had 62 coming in. So a pretty significant increase in the number of students coming into the district. And then looking at the open enrollment out, we still had a large number, 184. But if you go back 5 years, we had well over 200 students open enrolling out. So that's a huge change for us and a real good change, I think, and something that we hope to continue. It's a slow process because if you think about a family that enrolls maybe their oldest child in, and then the next child, and then the next child. So it's not something, that changeover, that's going to happen overnight, but we continue to make headway on that, and I think that's a real positive for us this year. Again, the highlights: an addition of 68 students in seats. We decreased the gap between open enrollment in and out from 124 students in 2019-20. I didn't do the next year because it was such an odd pandemic year, all the way down to 77 students in 2021-22. The largest, and I think this is also very important, we have the largest 4K, 5K, second grade, third grade, and fourth grade class in the last 5 years right now. And that's key when you look at those grade levels, because those are kids that will be continuing through our system. And so those numbers are really important to that kind of future vitality of the district, and really good to see. The recommendation would be to approve the 2021-2022 third Friday count as presented.
I move to approve the 2021-2022 third Friday count as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And motion carries.
So this is just information item. It's a painful piece of information. Last year, if you recall, right about this time, we were with WPS, and they came back with a bid that would have increased our total health insurance package by 28%, for a total of $408,730 increase in our overall budget. We gulped when that happened, and we went out to bid to see if we could get a better bid. And we did. We accepted the bid by UHC that provided actually not just for not an increase, but for a decrease of $117,000. a total of difference in savings from WPS of about $500,000. The employee contribution was dropped from 15% down to 10% because we felt strongly at that time that the savings that were gained should be passed on to our staff. Unfortunately, this year, we had a significant loss ratio, about 126% so far. Companies are not generally in the business of losing money, and so they have come back with a 40% increase, which in talking with our broker is almost unheard of. She does believe that it will reduce from there. She doesn't know how much it will reduce. We decided that there really was no option other than to at least try to go out to bid again, but knowing full well that our employees are not interested in significant changes from year to year. So that would be a fairly significant hit to our budget. As you heard, our business administrator, Marquez, the wizard, talk about how that is a factor that we have been, been keeping in mind as we propose our budget and looking for ways to make sure that we can cover that. That is, you know, we're gonna be, if worse comes to worse, and that is where we're at, obviously the hopeful would be that that high loss ratio does not continue into next year. We've asked for a recensus to kind of make sure we understood where that money was, to make sure that these weren't ongoing costs that may not occur next year, and getting credit for some of those. But right now we're kind of a little bit in a wait and see. We don't have a lot of time because the renewal is January 1, but we'll be working hard to get that in, and we'll very likely be bringing something back.
Connie, with regards to that, as far as going out to bid and waiting for results or returns or whatever, when did the district put out the bid, and have we got, and
When do we get it back?
and when do we get them back? Was there something in the document that said?
So we finalized them going out yesterday. There's a fair amount of information that gathers. They typically say 2 weeks, so we're hoping that we will have that information within 2 weeks to be able to make some sort of a decision at our November board meeting.
And the distribution of that, is that done, how is that actually done in terms of seeking bids from other companies, including, I presume, WPS could even come back with something?
Yep. So our broker, which is M3, would actually put that out. They are typically more able to do that than a district on their own would be, based on the connections they have in that. M3 is actually the largest school district broker in the state of Wisconsin, so hopefully that will have some impact. She did say she felt confident that there would be some movement on that, but never any guarantees. But I will say that even if we took that 40% increase, like let's say the worst happened and we had the 40% increase, we'd still be coming in about where we would have been with WPS this year. And that would be assuming that WPS came back with no increase this year. And so again, would have been pretty unlikely because of the, you know, the pretty high loss ratio. So even though that seems, I mean, obviously 40% is horrific, it still would bring us pretty close to where if we had taken the WPS bid last year, where we would have been. Plus, the UHC does give all of our employees that total point of service in terms of where they're able to go, rather than, for example, an HMO type offering.
And explain again why we do this in January versus doing it at the end of the academic school year.
I sure wish that it wasn't that way, but somewhere along the line, we got on that calendar. That is a very difficult and unique for school districts to be on that calendar, because our budgets run July 1 to June 30. And so when you get a health insurance renewal mid-year, January 1, that's not something that you can really budget for. Most private employers that are not school districts would run on a January 1 to January 1. Most school districts run July 1 to July 1. I talked with M3 about, is there any way we can get onto a July 1? The problem you have is we have a fairly significant HSA contribution. We also have a fairly significant, we're considered a high deductible plan. And so the only way for the district really to get out of that would be to cover a pretty significant amount of the deductible for our employees, because you wouldn't want them to get hit with a full deductible at 6 months and then another one 6 months later. So we figured it would cost somewhere in the vicinity of about $200,000 as a district for us to shift that to not do harm to our employees as it relates to the deductibles to get on that calendar. And we felt right now, based on what our budget is looking like, that that was not an expense that we wanted to recommend to the board at this time. For what is a kind of a difficult accounting thing to manage in budgeting thing, but not additional cost to the district by having a January 1 renewal.
Thanks, Annie. You good?
So again, this is just information. We're looking to try and address that somehow, but I wanted you to be aware because it is a significant portion of our budget. We'll be meeting with staff when we get some more information too. Obviously, the preference at this point would be not to make a change, but we'll kind of see where things go. And then just to spend a little bit of time, last couple weeks ago now, or a week ago, we held a board retreat to talk about some of the facility maintenance needs that were identified. I appreciate you bringing that up because it does give a good opportunity for us to begin that discussion. If you remember back, it's been a little over a year now, prior, before the pandemic really hit, where we kind of went out to get that facilities assessment done, to come in, take a look at our facilities and make recommendations around what are those things that need to be addressed pretty quickly, and what are things that we should be thinking about in the next 10 years. Because I think prior, there was, in some of those years, where you kind of would address projects as they came up, but there wasn't, it was a little more reactive as opposed to a real proactive look at how we address our facility needs. It is a real interesting quilt if you look at our overall facility, with additions going back to 1916, 1950, 1954, 56, 59, 64. Lots of additions to the building. It's very unique that way. This part of the building, as you're standing here, you would think to yourself, it's a very new section, updated part of the building. But this is one of those newer kind of add-on sections, and then as you go to other sections of the building, you'll see some pretty significantly different other things. So in that facility study, there were areas that were marked as being both poor or fair to poor, and most of those are our older sections of the building, ranging from about 1916 to about 1956. Overall, they assign conditions, so priority 1 items are those items that need pretty immediate attention. They may be a code violation, or they may be something that's at risk for failing very soon. Priority 2 items are those that, they're probably gonna be okay tomorrow, but it's certainly something that you want on your radar, and they're also kind of at the end of their useful life. So an example could be one of your boilers may be running okay, but it's at that point where it's kind of at the end of what the typical useful life might be, so it's something that you want to be thinking about in your overall budget. And then priority 3 are probably going to get you through the next 5 years, but again, kind of moving towards that end of that kind of life cycle. So of that, then, about $8 million worth of priority items were identified in going through our facility, which is a pretty significant amount. We've addressed about 1 million of those. You've heard you know, when we talked about the elevator, when we talked about some of the roofing, we've already addressed in some of the referendum money we had coming in, about $1 million worth of that. We have about another 600,000 that are out waiting on projects. For example, the well tank replacement and those types of things. It's been really challenging during the pandemic for a couple reasons. One being to just even bring contractors in. And then when you have contractors accept some of those projects, they struggle to get some of the supplies they need to complete those projects. We've shifted some money. You heard us talk about Fund 46, so we shifted about 1.2 million into that Fund 46, which is available to address some of these projects. And if a decision is made not to invest in some of those unused older sections of the building, that would take about $1 million off of those items. So like, for example, right now, the area where some of our, it's basically storage, you refer to it as the hump, it's one of the oldest sections of the building. No air conditioning, no elevator, it's not to code, lots of things like that. If a decision was made at some point, and these are all tough conversations and decisions to let go or tear down that part of the building, that would take off about $1 million worth of those priority items. So it brings up a really kind of tough reality for us, is that we have this revenue limit cliff that drops off this next year. So you can see on there where we've been operating at about that 14.5 or 14.6 million. It drops down pretty significantly. We would lose that 3.6 million. As I said earlier, about 1.5 million of that is just operating, keeping the lights on, utilities, those things paid. And then the other has gone towards kind of ongoing facility projects that the district has determined needed to be done. So it's certainly something that the board and the community will want to have some extensive conversations around and look to address. In looking at doing that, one of the other things that the architect that does the facility study does is gives you some options, gives you some, I guess they would call them concepts, and attaches price tags to those concepts, so that not in an attempt to, because remember these are architects, so they're not selling you a project, they're saying these are some options that the district may want to consider based on some of the areas that staff has identified as being deficient, based on areas that have not been updated for many years, based on some of those priority. So one of the things that they looked at was, what would it take to pretty significantly do an all-building remodel update, especially addressing those older areas of the building. So taking care of those, all of the priority items that were listed. Taking down that oldest section of the building and kind of building that fascia on that side of the building. Addressing things like, I'm 100% certain that every single parent we have would absolutely love us to get rid of the gravel in our playground area, in that middle area. So addressing things like that, updating classrooms and that. It's pricey, it would be. This is keeping the footprint that we have, other than taking down that old section of the building, about $27 million, so a pretty significant amount of money to do that. Then we asked about this is not an attempt to say this is what we should do, this is what are some options out there? And one of the things that we've heard pretty consistently from our families is that we're too big, that this is a school that is really large. As I mentioned, it is the largest K-8 in the state. And some of our families of 4K and 5K students feel kind of intimidated by coming into a building this size. And also the fact that, of course, we got 8th graders and 7th graders, and all these kids are all together in one building. So we just asked what it would look like if we potentially built a kindergarten building. So in other words, a 4K, 5K building, frees up room in the main building, but creates this nicer, welcoming environment for families as they come in with young children. It's a cheaper build because you don't have the extensive gymnasium, you don't have the huge cafeterias, you don't have all the signs. I mean, it's a cheaper build for a building, and that's why it would make much more sense, like to say do a kindergarten center as opposed to a middle school. I mean, a hugely difference in terms of cost to build. But just to get a feel for that, the estimate on a new 4K, 5K building built on our site would be about 10.7 million. So this is where the sticker shock comes in. If you did that and you renovated your present building, you'd be looking at about $38 million. And we know that's a huge amount. And so it's really just what could things look like down the road if we grew? Would you want to continue? Let's say that we see a lot of growth 10 years from now. Would you want to continue to add on to your building, or would you want to look to do something different? So just to get some information on that, that would be about $38 million. Then we talked a lot about an in-between levy boundary. Now, what I mean by an in-between levy boundary would be, we have a referendum. We know that we need about $1.5 million in operating. That leaves about $2+ million in there that could go to like a bonding project. And if you kept a reasonable timeline, so in other words, 10 years, and the reason I say 10 years is, 20 years for this district, it's so hard to know where the population could go in 20 years. So a 10-year is a little more reasonable timeline. So if you did that, you could do some pretty significant renovation to the building, not everything. You could address those maintenance priority items, do kind of a facelift. We kind of focused it on some more exploratory learning, kind of fixing that playground area. One of the things that's also kind of, if you go during our lunch hour and you look at our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, their playground is the bus parking lot. I mean, there isn't really any place for them to go. So looking at adding kind of a little bit of some outdoor areas, an outdoor classroom, for example, some increased science lab areas, adding on a new kind of office entrance over on that 4K, 5K side so that our families, that would be probably where Patty's office would be, and kind of that elementary, kind of segmenting the building. So again, a nice facelift, but staying within our levy boundary. The district could do a bonding project right around 18 million and still stay so that actually when you go out for a referendum, the levy would not increase for the referendum. So it would keep that flat. The difference is in the past, we would do a one-question operating. The difficulty with the operating is you can't do that future planning. You can kind of bite at the edges of doing some maintenance, but you can't do any kind of future build or planning. This would be a 2-question if the district were to go that route, which would include the operating of about $1.5 million and then the bonding of about 18 million. Together, those would keep your levy flat from this year, and you could still do those kind of improvements. So you can kind of see that would be like a 10-year levy out. Again, at the end of that 10 years, you drop down to kind of where your operating is, and obviously at that point you want to look at doing something again. But I think it could be an option for the district to look at if you wanted to do some more significant renovation to the facilities. The reality is this building is going to be a high maintenance building just because of its age. And I think if there's one thing we found out living in this building through the pandemic is that there are some drawbacks to it as well in terms of especially that kind of hands-on exploratory learning that we want to see kids do. I had a picture in there about a lot of the newer schools as they're built, they're there are built-in kind of collaboration spaces for kids to work together on projects and things like that. If you walk down our hallways, where you'll see the collaboration spaces our kids use is in the hallway during the classroom to try and kind of work on projects together and that. So just, again, this is, you know, options and cost examples, everything from 7 million all the way up to 22 million. I know, Steve, you asked to do something maybe even a little in between the 7 to 27. I'm kind of waiting for some information from our architect on that. But, you know, again, as I said, anything in between. I mean, that's where the district now, the board, will have to, in the next couple months, kind of, do we put this in, take this out, put this in, take that out? Do we look at just doing a operating referendum for the next 3 years and then look at some of this stuff down the road? And this is really where our staff, families, and community need to come in now. The board workshop was really just kind of that learning session to kind of see what some of the options might be. Our next step is for me to meet with staff and really go over and talk about some of these things and get their feedback. If you remember, part of that facility survey and study actually did ask staff about their kind of rating of spaces and in areas that they saw were deficiencies. And that's where a lot of these plans come from, is what the architects heard from our staff in terms of what some of the drawbacks were. But so the community will be hearing a lot about this in the next couple months, all kind of coming forward to, if the board wants to go then to some sort of a referendum in the spring, which would be in April 5th of 2022, they would need to adopt and file a resolution by 1/25/2022. So you can see we have about 3 months in here, a little less, to kind of make some decisions as to where the district wants to go. And so again, I just wanted to, this is that first brush, lots of questions out there, not a lot of answers right yet, a lot of conversations to occur, but just the initial kind of first look.
You know, what's interesting is prior to the well, it was kind of in between the full lockdown and to where we're at currently. You know, the board did a walkthrough through the school, which I thought was pretty, you know, you see what you see on a normal basis, right? And nowhere near what I thought some of those, the classroom spaces and some of those, just, I had no idea some of these spaces were how they are. And I'm not saying like, I mean, not necessarily decrepit by any means, but certainly not what the rest of the building, as we're used to looking at it, represents. You know what I mean? So I think there's a little bit of a perception thing sometimes. And, you know, you talk to people and they look at the school, and I don't. It's hard for them to visualize the things that, you know, I've been here for how long? You know, and it was the first time I've ever seen some of those spaces, and you know, teachers and students have to learn in those spaces. I'm kind of scratching my head, right? So just very interesting, some, you know, the information, you know, and to some degree, when I look at all this, you know, it's hard not to ignore where interest rates are right now too, right? And I don't think hopefully not in my lifetime, again, I see these interest rates the way they are right now, because obviously they're a direct reflection of what the economy is to a degree because of the pandemic, but it would be well advised, I think, to try to take advantage of that, because that's millions of dollars saved right there if you're looking at larger projects, generally speaking. So.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's where, again, that concept of if you are going to borrow, now is a good time to do that. You know, that can change the cost. If you take a look at a $18 million referendum, you're right, it can absolutely be over a period of time, over $1 million that can be saved in doing that. And typically, so when we came up with the 18 million, Baird kind of goes through and takes a look at what, they're very conservative in doing that. So when they give you that, they believe that the district could borrow up to $18 million over that 10-year period. That's a conservative estimate, which may well come in less than that based on a better interest rate.
Sure. And I don't always want to collaborate space with educational prowess necessarily. However, I know if I'm stuck in a dark, gloomy room all day for 8 hours doing work, my productivity level is different than in something that has windows and proper lighting and the appropriate tools necessary. So, you know, I know that commonly gets brought up to some degree. However, I think there is a correlation, absolutely.
I think the other factor too, and I think, you know, when you live in a district like Salem that has Wisconsin open enrollment, and you have districts that are that close by, we right now, as I said, we send over $1 million to other districts. If we're able to turn that will be a significant savings for our district going forward, and may even lead us to the point where we don't necessarily need that operating referendum in the future. But if you have a district next to you that's doing significant facility renovation, and that's one of the things, if you remember this summer, where I gave you that assignment of driving up to our buildings from all four different directions.
Right? Yeah, that was interesting.
Because if you think about families that are coming from very near districts, what do they see when they see our building? Because it's not fair, but they look at a building as representing what goes on inside. And so it is, I think, important for us to attend to the public and community perception of our facilities, because these are families that will hopefully choose to send their children here. And if there are districts very nearby us that have significantly better, and I don't mean better in that they look better, but better science labs, better makerspace rooms, more space for exploratory learning, all of those things. The one thing that we have that no other district around us has is land. And we've been working pretty heavily with our staff to really start taking advantage of that through some of our exploratory learning projects and that type of thing. And so if you look at that levy-based one, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, it really seeks to kind of capture some of the uniqueness of Salem School District and extend that a little bit into kind of our learning processes, like with an outdoor classroom, for example, focused on some of our land, our prairie land and that we have as part of the district. So, and again, all these are things, they're like, it's like you start out with a potential home build and you say, well, we don't need that, or a potential home remodel. Be wonderful to do the kitchen, but maybe not now. You know, but they're pieces that you pull in and pull out, and that's really the goal of these next couple weeks, is to or these next couple months, to engage with our families in our community and find out what is it that you want from your schools, and what is it that you feel strongly about supporting before we go forward.
Connie, a comment and then a question. As I stated at the retreat, that I personally like the idea of something in between that 7 and the 27 million figure. When we look at the pressing needs and also the 4K, 5K building, that comes to right about $18 million, 18 or 19 million, based on the numbers that I saw on the screen. My question for you is, if we were to build that 4K, 5K building, and the fact that we now have a full day of 4K program, right? What are your thoughts, and maybe the other administrators as well, to how will that draw more students into our district, either keeping our current population here and not going to Bristow or Trevor or Wilmot, or to have students from other districts wanting to come in here for the educational value?
So it would be a little bit difficult just to do the 4K, 5K, because if you think about our classrooms right now, the 4K, 5K classrooms are a different size. They're set up for 4K. So to do that and leave those areas untouched would probably not result in kind of an optimal use of those sections of the building. So, but it certainly would be an option. The impact on families, this is all guessing and word of mouth, but there is no question that our families do feel concern about coming to Salem because of its size. And it would also be true that for your 4K, 5K, those would be your parents who typically would be the most concerned about maybe sending their kids here. It's a first-time experience into a school system. And we know that if a student, I have great faith in our staff and the program that we offer. We know that if a student or family comes to us in 4K, we believe they'll stay with us. If they don't give us that first chance, they probably won't come back either. And so that's why it's so important for us to have a engaging and optimal 4K and 5K program to have those families not kind of discard us out of hand because of our size. So I do believe it would have an impact. Whether, you know, am I an expert? Have I talked to all those families? No, I haven't. But from what I hear from the families that do come, and from what I've seen from families now that we have the full day 4K, that isn't just full day, it's much more kind of hands-on and exploratory oriented. We've seen an increase in the number of students who have both chosen to stay in our district and come to our district for 4K.
Thank you.
Anything else? And again, there'll be lots and lots of conversation and that. I don't want anyone to think that any of these decisions are made. These are just options that are out there for us to at least start that conversation with our families about what comes next.
Thank you, Connie.
So committee reports at this point, we've been so engaged in our special board meetings. We have not had separate committee meetings, so I don't have any of those. And at this point, I'm not recommending. It is possible that, you know, in terms of future board meetings, should something really shake loose related to the insurance renewal, it's possible we could call a special board meeting for that. But my preference would be, we've got our next regular school board meeting. These next couple weeks and that we'll be sending out information to families to kind of start engaging around their thoughts about, you know, the potential for what we might be doing in the future as it relates to a referendum.
When was the consensus sent out?
What was the what?
The consensus for the health insurance?
The final was sent out yesterday. We had to
Yeah,
send
so
them,
I mean that's,
so 2 weeks.
yeah, you probably, and then it's gonna take underwriting probably another week after that, I'm gonna guess, so probably right in line with the next board meeting for sure.
And do we
I'm
want
thinking that, but then, so during this next, like, 2 to 3 weeks, we'd really like to get information, not information out to families as to what to do, but options for families to talk with us. And certainly the board, you know, would be invited to be a part of that process.
I guess one last thing on that, with the COVID and things of that nature, I think some of the eye-opening things that we saw as board members inside the building, you know, I think it would be amazing not only if we could physically get people, but even if it's a electronic exploratory way of doing something might be interesting on that as well. Because I'll tell you from that point on, you know, my perception of the building changed dramatically, I would say.
I think, you know, even with COVID, I don't see any reason why we can't invite our families in at night. You know, we've been pretty careful about having a lot of additional people here during the day with our students, but whether it's, you know, night meetings or whether it's virtual or however it is, I think we're very much at the level right now with our COVID kind of protocols that we could certainly have our families come in and go through some walkthroughs of our building. Okay.
negotiations? Do you want to wait until we get more insurance?
I really feel like we need to wait until we get our health insurance
Don't
quotes
we
back.
normally do that in
We
November?
usually do that, like, if you follow last year's schedule, which we're very much on that schedule, it'll be very early December.
Okay. Makes sense. And if you guys recall, we did a yearly review of when the meetings would be, so we changed it from the 4th Tuesday for next month to the 5th Tuesday. So we have a 5-week break.
A week after Thanksgiving.
Yep. Perfect. I move to adjourn the meeting at 8:01 PM.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And motion carries.